Welcome and welcome to my channel. This is part 4 in my series of long lost Oldham pubs. Hope you enjoy it. And please don't forget, please like and subscribe. John Whittaker, a barber and wig maker, had an alehouse in Oldham called the Heron Hounds. As early as 1756, he was the son of William Whittaker, who was also a barber and wig maker. John died on the 31st of January 1790. Before Yorkshire Street was completed, after 1804, the Heron Hounds was set back from the High Street on Coalpit Lane, which passed along the old quarry where the old town hall now stands. In Shaw's Annals of Oldham, George Wright is listed at the Heron Hounds in 1792. His name appears in Oldham's alehouse records from 1786, so he probably succeeded John Whittaker at the pub. In the 1970s, the landlord at this time was James Kerr, and he ran the Heron Hounds until 1981. His wife and his son, Alan, had the licence until 1992. The Heron Hounds is now owned by the Boddington Pub Company. In 1844, Daniel Newton, a cotton waste dealer, moved from the Globe on Huddersfield Road to a newly built public house on Featherstall Road at Westwood. The pub faced Platt's new Hartford Works, and so Daniel called it the New Hartford Inn. He had chosen a good site for his venture. Oldham's only railway station was 100 yards away, and within 2 years the works was employing 400 people. Thomas Ashton was licensee in 1864, by which time the New had been dropped from the pub's name. 20 years later, the owners were the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, who leased it to J.W. Lees. Despite the proximity of so much industry, trade at the Hartford must have been poor between 1900 and 1928. So fewer than 13 licensees came and went. James Harrington took over in the latter year, but the magistrates decided to take away the licence in 1929. In 1762, Joseph Fletcher was running an alehouse called the Hatton Feathers. 4 years later, he changed the name to the Hatton Feathers, and he kept the licence until he died in 1789, aged 56. The precise location of this alehouse is not recorded, but it was probably the one at Bottom of the Moor. Licensees over the next few years, the Hatton Feathers saw several tenants come and go, and then the crunch came on the 13th of September 1903. Police went into the pub and caught customers gambling for high stakes. Licensee William Whitworth was fined £20 plus costs and closure was recommended. The licence was eventually taken on the 11th of February 1905. The building became a doss house and it was not demolished until the 1960s. The site is now occupied by the White Eagle Motor Company. The Hatton Feather was built in an area called Bradley Bent, Thiis in Bower Lane, and opened in 1824. The first licensee and owner was John G., who 4 years earlier had been a deputy overseer for Oldham. The hat manufacturer of G. Miller and Kershaw was not far away, hence the name Hatton Feather. The S was added about 1850. The Hatton Feathers was given the present layout in 1972, when the smoke room became an open area facing the bar, and the tap room became a snug, and the bar parlour, first left, became the smoke room. In the 1890s, Oldham Brewery wanted to build a new pub near the Ashton border at Havashaw. In exchange for planning permission, they offered to close the White Lion in the marketplace and give the land to the corporation, and also to close an off-licence at 2 Jones Street. The corporation jumped at the offer, as they could demolish the White Lion and open up a cramped market area. Oldham Brewery opened the Havashaw Hotel in 1900 with a licence from the White Lion. In April 1954, the Oldham-Ashton border was moved from Havashaw to the River Medlock at Bardsley. Later, the Fitton Hill housing estate was completed, providing more customers for the hotel. Alan Entwistle moved from the Plough at Werner to take the licence in 1976, and he kept the Havashaw until his death in 1983. Fred Royals then came from the Park Hotel and took over until 1987. In 1835, James Shaw was a cotton waste dealer at Lower Moor. His business was based at the Castle Mill Street, and he lived in a large square, detached house at the junction of Shaw Road and Edge Lane Road. By 1841, James had converted his home into a public house, which he called the Junction Inn. He must have been fairly well off. He also had a bowling green laid out. Robinson's Brewery took over Kay's in 1929, and from then until 1970, few licensees stayed longer than 3 years. Brian McGlynn changed all that when he took over in the latter year, and kept the pub until 1986. 2 years longer than the errant butcher John Mayor over a century before. In the early part of the 18th century, the highway between Manchester and Oldham was improved. New straight sections were made, where the old road wound through hamlets along the way, such as at Failsworth, and gradients were lessened by filling in holes, in 1736 John Winterbourne owned an inn on this ancient route at Copster Hill, Hollins, and gave it the sign of the Noggin End. In 1913, Oldham Brewery was given permission to demolish the old Noggin Inn and build a new pub. When this opened on the 24th of December 1914, the country was at war, so instead of naming it the Noggin Inn as planned, the brewery chose the patriotic King George Hotel. Today, the King George is owned by the Boddington Pub Company. The King's Arms was situated on the west side of Ashton Road, 4 doors down from Scott Street. It was originally called the Pitt and Nelson and was kept by John Halsworth in 1827 and 1828. The Pitt and Nelson had become the King's Arms by 1834. Fred Langley closed the doors at the King's Arms for the last time in 1964. Then on the 8th of December he opened the new pub, the Red Rose, on Lees New Road. The King's Arms, seen here decorated for the coronation. On the 13th of September 1826, Rowbottom noted that Benjamin Clegg of the Iron Dish, the Dr. Syntax, had obtained a new licence for a house he owned at Mill End. This could only have been the King's Arms, which was built on the land previously occupied by a smithy run by Jack Radcliffe. Instead, it was closed on the 15th of October 1918 and converted into a maternity hospital. When the maternity block at Boundary Park Hospital was opened in 1939, the former pub became a child welfare centre. Sometime after 1824, Joseph Garrick had a house built on York Street, the continuation of Cotton Street, which connected Manchester Street to Bent Street, later Lower West Street. In 1828, the house was licensed to sell beer, porter and spirits by Jonathan Fowler, Mr. Garrick's tenant. John Southern was in charge and things went wrong for him in March 1861 when he was fined 20 shillings for serving in prohibited hours. John really upset the magistrates and the police and got another 20 shillings fine when he was summoned for harbouring a policeman while on duty. Licensees come and go. The last was John Nyland, who shut the pub on the 17th of March 1968 and moved to the Farmer's Boy on Huddersfield Road. The corporation had acquired the pub with a compulsory purchase order, and in due time Sainsbury's built their supermarket over the site. In 1762, Jonathan Mellor, who had a shoe shop on George Brow, obtained a licence and duly called his alehouse the Boot and Shoes. The next year, John Horrock had the licence, and he was probably responsible for changing the name to the Lamb Inn. When news of Napoleon's abdication reached Oldham, the event was celebrated by a procession almost unequalled in local annals for its splendour and extent. According to James Butterworth, Rowbottom wrote, "At Mrs. Horrocks' Lamb Inn, an exalted dinner was provided. Manufacturers laid on dinners and ale for their workers, and the main inns, the Angel and the Lamb and the Spread Eagle, were brilliantly illuminated." The Lamb closed on 8th of February 1922, and the building became a confectioner's shop and cafe. It was later used as a furniture's, then pulled down. The Abbey National Building Society had offices on the site until 1900, when these were demolished for the new development. In 1823, Joseph Mellor first appears in Alehouse Records as the licensee of the British flag on Manchester Street. He died on the 11th of July 1825, and Anne Mellor took over for a year. This pub may have been the predecessor of the Lancashire Vaults. When Booth Bridge arrived in 1883, New Vaults became the Lancashire Hotel. Lancashire was the only pub between the Friendship and St Domingo Street, King Street crossing. The Lancashire closed in 1981, and the building was said to have been sold to the owners of the Belgrade Hotel. However, it remained empty until 1987, when Sainsbury's bought the land and demolished the pub to make way for an approach road. Work on the new road through Oldham and onto Huddersfield was well underway in 1802, which has no doubt prompted John Williamson to build his public house at the bottom of the moor in that year. He called it the Bull's Head and stayed until at least 1820. In 1941, John Smith's Brewery of Tadcaster took over the Dunkingfield Brewery and promptly renamed the Bull's Head the Magnet, after the brand name of its ales. It became a club-type pub with diminishing success. On the 12th of February 1981, the Magnet was renamed the Moor End, and it survived a few more years before closing in 1986. Primrose Bank formed part of the old road to Ashton, so when the new road was made, the Bay Horse was in a backwater. Its owner, John Taylor, therefore built a new pub at the bottom of the bank on the corner of the new road and called it the Horse and Jockey. Jeremiah Mitchell took over, and he was responsible for changing the name to the Mayor and Pole. The Mayor and Pole closed for a short time in 1991 for major internal alterations. The result was quite tasteful, especially when compared with the 1972 alterations. In June 1992, the pub became the property of Vaughan Breweries. The Medlock Hotel was opened in 1858 by John Wolfenden. It stood in an area called Belfold and was named after a cotton mill on the other side of Shaw Road. By 1908, Forsyth Limited owned the Medlock Hotel and were still the owners when the pub shut. John Francis closed the doors for the last time on the 11th of April 1957. A lot of the information from this video I got from this excellent book by Rob McGee. And please don't forget, like and subscribe.